Thanks for joining me today, Robyn.
Pleasure, Danny.
So nice to see you and have a glimpse into your life and your studio.
Yeah, thank you. This is my little kind of watercolour corner, gouache corner, and just all my little drawings and notes and things from trips away.
Yeah, oh, it's great to, like we were saying earlier, it's great to have a little sneak peek into the artist studio. There's a real mystery about what artists get up to in their little nooks at home. Whereabouts are you based at the moment?
I have my studio and where I live is in Mullumbimby in northern New South Wales. So, but originally I'm a Victorian girl. I grew up in Melbourne. I've been up here now 32 years, so I'm almost a local.
Almost.
Yeah.
I was reading somewhere the other day that you need to, especially in sort of smaller country towns, you need to be there for at least 25 years to be considered a local.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I moved up here when it was a very sleepy little village behind Byron Bay, which, on the coast here. And these days it's not so sleepy. It's quite busy. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we might get started today. I'd love to hear about how you first became interested in art and I guess when you first realised that you could be an artist as a sort of career.
Yeah, well, I guess, for every person it's a different journey. But even when I was young, and a lot of people do say this, that they'd always been interested in art. And when I went to school, I went to a school where I was lucky enough to be able to choose subjects, even in year 10, that specialised. My dad was in advertising, and in those days, there was a lot of his friends were artists because they used to employ a lot of artists. So I was exposed, I suppose, to a lot of art. My dad was also a bit of a Sunday painter, even though he would have liked to have done a bit more. He was always bringing the oil paints out on family holidays and trying to paint the landscape. So it was just something I knew I wanted to do. So when I left school, I went to, it was the State College of Victoria at that time, Melbourne Uni there in Grattan Street. And it was a combination of doing an arts degree and teaching, even though I quite like the idea of just doing a fine arts degree. But, you were encouraged to have a career in arts. So I did that for 4 years, and I taught for a few years in secondary schools in Victoria. And then when I came up here, I don't know, I think it just gave me a little bit of space to actually start working out what I wanted to do. And I had young children, and it's funny when you have young children and you don't have enough time, you suddenly decide what you want to do and you can't. So I basically started, I painted when I was at college, but then I actually majored in ceramics, but because I think I didn't actually know what I wanted to paint. So it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I kind of started to, just sort of hone in on what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to be a realist, which was a difficult thing when I went to art school because I suppose it was a little bit more encouraged to be abstract and, sort of New York school type work, and realism sort of wasn't sort of taught to you, the skills of doing realism anyway. So I did a lot of still life when I first started painting, and then I think it was about, like 17 years ago, I just suddenly had an epiphany. I'd always been interested in houses, and it was just, it was just something I was interested in, and different types of houses. I think growing up in Melbourne, in Mount Waverley I grew up, which when my dad and mum first built their first house, it was just paddocks. So I grew up in a very sort of open, sort of free type environment then. Mount Waverley's not like that anymore, but definitely we had a paddock and we had a creek. Yeah, I had a Mullumbimby when I first came here reminded me, I suppose, a little bit of the post-war housing that I grew up with, and I think that sort of attracted me to it. And then I suppose about 17 years ago, I realised the things were changing. You know, new people were coming into town. You know, houses were changing. So yeah, I decided to just for myself. I did my first exhibition of houses, of local houses in Mullumbimby. Never thinking I'd still be painting them now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just really about my place that I'd found here, and that what meant something to me. But definitely it was because of the background I grew up with. Even though Mum and Dad's house actually was an architect designed house, it was just basically a white box, actually grey. But all the houses around us were, you know, triple fronted, you know, sort of probably $10 plan. And there was a housing scheme in Melbourne that encouraged people to build their own houses after the war. And it would have been a scattering of, you know, Robyn Boyd houses as well. But I wouldn't have known that as a child. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, architecture over the years has really interested me, and just different styles, and I suppose the social connection of why people live in houses the way they do, or why they change things. Yeah, so
yeah, it's really your images of those post-war houses are quite stunning, and it's interesting, I guess, the relationship on the Mornington Peninsula where you undertook the residency at Police Point, and some of the areas down here, especially Rosebud and Safety Beach, some of those spots where there's little pockets of those houses that still are not that changed, really, probably from what that used to be.
I think that's the interesting thing is, I think, look, you know, the suburbs and how we live is constantly changing. It's nothing will ever stay the same, but I was really interested to go back there because we did have a holiday house at Sorrento for many years. My dad, with a group of his friends after the war, when they came back, they must have bought a really cheap block of land, which, you know, it was a huge block of land at Sorrento, and they just built it cheaply and used secondhand materials, and it was really just a shack. But I spent many happy years down there, you know, and then I think in the early 80s, they decided to sell it. Well, they decided to sell it. And I think all of us were a bit young to sort of go and get a mortgage and go and buy it. But I think I was just really interested to go back there and just see my connection, because it wasn't just the house that we lived in. It was because it was such a simple shack. We spent a lot of time, you know, exploring and going across the sand dunes to the back beach, and, you know, through tracks and through middens. And I don't know if you know St Paul's Beach, there's a cave there, and in those, it's all sealed off now, but as kids we could sit in there. And I think, yeah, it was a very special place, I think, for me, in fact, in my memories. And of course, you know, it's a changing landscape down there. So when I was, you know, looking for houses, someone said to me, "Oh, you're trying to find your old beach house." Sort of like, but you know, I wasn't. But I was trying to capture that, you know, sort of find places that might capture that essence of the time that I spent there. And
what was it like for you to go back down to that space when you're down on the residency?
You know, as soon as I go down to that beach and the place, the smells actually evoke such strong memory. And interesting enough that a lot of the beaches look much the same, you know, that's the thing that really hasn't changed. And I really wanted to go to Police Point because when we were young, it was an army base and you couldn't actually go beyond there. And I think it's such a unique and special place because it had been limited to, you know, sort of habitation, I suppose, or encroachment. And I know that there was a big fight by the community to try and keep that as a national park and not be developed. So I just think it's, you know, the moona trees are incredibly evocative, and there's just something about those trees that I think I have that memory as a child being in sort of almost enveloped, and yeah, there's they sort of remind me, I think, of, you know, almost like a house. You know, they've got a sense of protectiveness. So yeah, it was just really interesting to go back. I didn't expect, you know, the place to be the same, but I did spend a lot of time going up and down from Portsea to Dramana, actually, up and down, looking for places that sort of had the right light. You know, it's not just about, say, a style of house, it's also a combination of, you know, light, how it hits on a building. And I found the house that you've got in the anniversary show, when the light wasn't on it, so I actually had to come back and look at it again at a certain time of, you know, I always have to work out where north and south is and east and west to try and work out where the best light is. So yeah, it was really interesting, and there are pockets of, you know, houses that on big lots that are, you know, nestled in behind the tea tree and moona tree, and you know, they're obviously still valued. Unfortunately, these days land value is so high, and there's such a demand for larger houses and a different way of life, I suppose. You know, in those days when you went down to the peninsula, it was like, it took a few hours. You know, it was like a big trek, whereas with the highway and, yeah, you know, it's a little bit faster to get down, and people must commute, I think, now.
Yeah, the accessibility's greatly been increased with the Peninsula Link and the freeway down into the Mornington Peninsula.
I have to sometimes time my visits on that freeway because of the traffic jam.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty busy.
And I guess I'm just thinking, like, the work that you, I guess, made while you were down on the residency, you actually created quite a few drawings of the landscape down there as well.
Yeah, well, I think for me that's, being a studio-based artist most of the time, I actually dream all the time of actually having the, you know, the luxury, I suppose, of having a few weeks of being able to sit in the landscape. And I think there's just nothing better than, you know, just being in that environment and really focusing on what you're looking at. And where the residency is, you know, the landscape was constantly changing depending on the light and the time of day. And then, you know, summertime was sometimes raining, windy. But yeah, it's one of my favourite things, I think, to do, is actually, I can't often do that in front of houses. Just because I feel self-conscious, and also it takes me too long. So I do take a series of photographs to use as reference. But the landscape, I really enjoy. I think there's a few behind there. I just loved watching the ships come in as well, you know, and that at night time and in the evening. It was very special. So,
yeah, it's quite a fascinating vantage point, isn't it, to actually look out to the bay and to have that huge grassed area, and then to see the big ships come in all the time.
And you've got, you know, echidnas, and then, you know, wallabies or kangaroos sort of popping through that landscape too. So you're on the edge of, you know, that you're on the edge of sort of quite a busy area, but then you've got this sort of very unique sort of place, which is sort of, you're almost just watching the world go by a bit.
No, it's nearly all the artists that have been down on the residency have just been sort of so inspired by that place and the location. It's really created quite a lot of exciting and interesting new projects.
Yeah, it was great. And look, I think for me, you know, the land, I think because I moved up here, and up here is quite a different landscape. It's quite subtropical and generally green, and palm trees and very bright coloured plants. Whereas I think growing up in Victoria, going away and then coming back, you kind of see the landscape freshly. And there's just something about that dry, grassy landscape that really resonates with me, I think. I think there's a good contrast between, you know, just the grounds and the grasses and the landscape.
Mm.
And up here, you just have a green palette. Green grass, green trees, and then maybe the occasional flash of colour. I think going away from places and then, you know, revisiting it really, and I've been travelling back and forward, you know, the whole time that I've lived up here. So each time I go, I kind of get that sense of, you know, sort of feeling of being at home. It's a very strong sense, and yet my life's up here. So I'm often sort of like a voyeur almost to, you know, sort of a life that I did once live down there.
Are there other areas around the country that you, I guess, examine or excavate for sort of?
Well, everywhere I go,
yeah,
drives me crazy a little bit. I like going out west, out into Western New South Wales. I think a lot of the, you know, the rural towns there have a certain essence about them as well. And it's like a bit of a time capsule in some of those places. And the last few years I've been really concentrating on the coast, and I think, well, because I live coastal and a lot of the, you know, the memories of down in Victoria was coastal. I have sisters that live on the coast as well. There's something about the beach house, I think, that's really kind of I've been focusing on, because I think it's just that it evokes a way of life. You know, they were built for a certain reason, and they were very simple and austere, and it wasn't about the exterior so much, or showing off, or, you know, sort of, it wasn't there wasn't a value, a monetary value. It was more the fact of just living a simpler life and having an escape from your life, your normal life, and
quite utilitarian, really. That there's just the
you swept it out, and you know, there wasn't. I think these days we're quite bombarded with how people think we should live, or, you know, sort of the value of things have changed, I think, and particularly along the coast, because the coast of Australia is, you know, very, you know, it's the biggest population everywhere. So if you travel around the coast, that's where the greatest density is, and it's where everyone wants to live because it's near water. And I think the coast is sort of ingrained in our psyche, you know, as people, really. But, you know, a lot of the houses that I have started painting are disappearing, you know, because they're on lovely blocks and they're near the sea, and so they're worth a lot of money. And so, I guess, and it's happening also in Bayside suburbs of Melbourne. My mum lived at Parkdale, so I was watching those big blocks there being, you know, houses being demolished and big houses being put up. And there's a lot of, I think I've just noticed a rapid changing. I think the landscape that I grew up in seemed to sort of stay pretty much the same for a long time, but I think in the last 10 years it seems to have accelerated. And
especially down in Melbourne, like in terms of the acceleration of population growth, it's really it's just skyrocketing.
It's putting pressure on just councils making decisions. I know there's a lot more interest now in that mid-century modern type housing, and there's groups formed now that are trying to you know, show councils that they're actually valuable, you know, as in a historical sense, and they're often beautifully built. And I think that era, and that's what sort of interested me, I think, in that era was, you know, even the triple fronted brick veneer is sort of almost a pared back modernist house. You know, it took all the decorations off because people didn't have a lot of money, but I think they've been undervalued for a long time. And look, you know, there's certain aspects of them that weren't probably architecturally thought about. You know, they probably weren't facing the right way, or the windows are in the wrong spot. But but those houses that were built, you know, after the war with architects, a lot of young architects that were coming from Europe as well. I think there was a lot of thought about those houses. So yeah, I mean, look, but there's obviously a lot of people that don't value those houses. So that's the other thing. I think the problem with asbestos, it doesn't help. A lot of those houses were built from fibroboard, which have asbestos in them. So it's, you know, they're kind of looked as upon, you know, sort of not so nice.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? But you know, there are architects using sort of, you know, looking to the past and using that as inspiration for some of their, you know, new designs, which I think is exciting. You know?
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I wanted to ask you, what have you found to be the most sort of challenging aspects of, I guess, yeah, well, you mentioned that you had that epiphany 17 years ago and found, I guess, the subject matter that really sort of caught your attention and inspired you. But what's been some of the sort of most challenging aspects of maintaining a practice?
Well, monetary survival, really, I suppose, is, you know, the biggest thing, because when I started my practice, I actually had 3 young children, and then I was a single parent for 16 years. So, you know, there was a big dilemma sometimes about actually buying materials to paint with, you know, because it was just financially a struggle. You know, you still got to pay your bills as an artist.
Yeah.
And I mean, luckily that I had done the teaching, and so I did go, and I was teaching at TAFE for many years. I taught adult education, and that was, you know, so many of my friends who are artists have taught over the years as a complementary part of their practice. And I think it actually helps build your practice in a way too. So, but you know, to be an artist, you've actually got to make decisions in your life that make it happen too. There's no magic formula. You know, because if you actually, you know, sort of thought there was something you could teach that was a formula to make it work, I think through adversity and even sort of setbacks, and, you know, you do get a lot of negative, you know, disappointments along the way. It was just a matter of you just keeping on going. You know, you might just sort of feel a bit flat for a while, but you just go ahead and do things. And what I did, because I was a regional artist and there wasn't a lot of opportunities up here, apart from the regional gallery network, which are fabulous. We've got the Lismore Regional Gallery, we've got the Tweed Regional Gallery, which have been very supportive and, you know, of their local artists. And I had opportunities through those. And I think...
Well, two great local galleries to have close by. Like they're amazing what both of those galleries have achieved.
Yeah, so I think it's just the fact of just keeping on doing what, you know, as much as you can, and entering group shows, prizes. And I think that's what it was that I started sort of looking, you know, just entering things into prizes into Sydney, and opportunities just sort of, you know, came up through that. But I had to wait for a while for the kids to grow up. I wish I'd started a little bit earlier, but well,
that must have been quite challenging and had its own set of a bit of patience and
So I said I spent, you know, a lot of my practice early on when they were young indoors, so that's when I was doing a lot of still life. And then when they got a bit older, I got outside. I think what happened was that I actually realised I had to paint my own landscape, and that's sort of, you know, like in a sort of not literally, but basically, you know, sort of what I was really interested in. You know, it kind of brought two areas that I was interested in together, and then really, I guess it's just there's so many aspects of how we live and how there's so many houses I could paint. I mean, it's a bit and daunting sometimes. You know, how many houses can you paint? I mean, I can't, you know. So I just think I just found that combination, because almost when I'm actually composing a picture, you know, like I do take photographs, but then I do drawings to compose the picture. So it's not just copying, I'm not just copying a photograph, but I'm almost like shuffling things around like a still life, you know, like, you know, moving trees and rubbish things. So, you know, it's very much a compositional thing, as well as, you know, trying to evoke a certain feeling, I suppose, about what I'm looking at.
And how is the like, it's been a pretty challenging year, really. How has 2020 changed for you? What did you have plans to have exhibitions lined up? And
well, I did, and so after the residency, I came back here, but I actually spent a bit of time in Melbourne because my mum wasn't well and she passed away in September last year. So I was having a solo exhibition in May, and so I was, then it was when I came back here, there was drought, and then the fires, and then we had some floods, and then COVID. So I was trying to paint in the studio and think about, you know, where I'd been the summer before. So it was quite challenging. This was, you know, like for everyone, just trying to focus on what I was doing when, you know, everybody, the world that we knew under our feet was just constantly changing. And I think that, in a way, reflecting on what I was looking at before, I mean, about houses and home, you know, for everybody, that became the focus of our world, really. That if you were lucky enough to have a safe place. So that sort of also disturbed me about people, you know, where we live, we get a lot of travellers, and even around the studios, there's people living in their cars. And so, you know, there's always a sense of edge about that, because, you know, it must be very hard to be going through what we've gone through this year without having a safe place to live in. So yeah, it was, and then the show that I was having at Art House Gallery in Sydney, they decided they'd go ahead anyway, even if we couldn't have an opening and no one could see it, that they would still, you know, attempt to show it. So they just gave me another month to do that, and so I did that, and luckily that week before was the first week that they actually opened up again for people to actually be able to, I think there was like 10 people or something could come in. So in a way it worked out quite well for me, because everyone was so excited about going out, getting out of their houses. I mean, in Melbourne, obviously you've not been so lucky as we have, but and particularly on the North Coast, we did have our lockdown, but it hasn't been at all. We haven't had to wear masks compulsorily. Life sort of seemed pretty normal with a bit of an edge to it. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, well, it was really nice to see your exhibition at Art House, and to see, I guess, the online content that you had helped create. That was, I really love that, actually. It's so nice to hear you speak about the work, and to see an exhibition that we obviously couldn't get to physically.
Well, that adds, that added another sort of dimension, because usually you have to do a body of work and you have a show and you have an opening, and then you get to engage with people at the opening. You know, sometimes give a talk, but then all of a sudden, you know, you're supposed to do movies and talk about it. And while I was doing that movie, like Sam Neill walked in behind us and walked into the other gallery, like, and here's us trying to be actors doing a walkthrough. It was a bit confronting, you know, because a lot of artists I know aren't really used to, you know, sort of, you know, they're in a studio and they're pretty shy about doing, you know, sort of things like that. So yeah, it was sort of certainly confronting, but I think everyone was just trying to do a really good job of trying to, you know, change the way galleries will introduce audiences to work, I think.
yeah, I think the big challenge is to try and embrace that change and to adapt in this sort of new environment. So, yeah, it's been a challenging year, but yeah, hopefully we'll get to reopen our 50th anniversary show before it closes, so that people can actually see our collection, but see your beautiful work, which we've done.
For me, it was just such an honour for me to be, to have that work in your show, because that, as I said, that the whole place meant so much to me, and had such a personal sort of meaning. So it was really, and then it's been open for a week. So I thought, and you must have put so much work into doing that show as well.
Yeah, it's crazy, to be honest, but just really exciting that it looks like we will be able to open for at least a week or two in November. That's what we sort of do the job for, to actually put on exhibitions and have people come in and enjoy the show. And like you said earlier, I think people are really craving that. They've been denied that for so long, especially down in Melbourne, that especially a lot of the friends of the gallery want to really get back in and see their collection. So we're hoping that it's a really positive step to reopen the doors soon.
I know, and I think that makes you realise too, because we live in such a digital world now and on our phones, and that's been a great way of connecting. I mean, we couldn't have this conversation if we didn't have that, but there's nothing like actually seeing work, in real life and experiencing that, I think. I was coming down in May or early this year to Victoria, but then I couldn't do that. So there's also that, I can't actually go down there, and it seems very elusive now.
Yeah. They announced today that the borders will reopen on the 23rd between Victoria and New South Wales. So that's a nice step. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, because I've got a lot of my family are in Victoria, so they've been spending lots of hours indoors.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been great to speak to you and to just talk about your practice and your career. So thanks so much for being in our 50th anniversary show, and look forward to seeing you back in Victoria soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thanks, Robyn.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.